Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be back in the book of Mark. We're going to be looking at the casting out of demons into pigs and various other things. But before we begin, if you are new here, if you're unfamiliar with what is going on, I hold some unconventional beliefs and I am holding an unconventional Bible study. And it is highly recommended to start at the beginning because it can be a little bit hard to keep up, and I would hate for you to get lost. For those who have been following along and know what we're doing, we are in Mark 5 because we left off in Mark 4. We're going to try and get through 8 today, so I'm going to move at a fast clip. There's a lot of things, so let's go. On the other side of the sea, they arrived in the region of Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, he was met by a man with an unclean spirit who was coming from the tombs. This man had been living in the tombs and could no longer be restrained, even with chains. Though he was often bound with chains and shackles, he had broken the chains and shattered the shackles. Now there was no one with the strength to subdue him. Night and day, in the tombs and in the mountains, he kept crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when the man saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees before him. And he shouted in a loud voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God not to torture me." For Jesus had already declared, "Come out of this man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" Jesus asked. "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus repeatedly not to send them out of that region. There, on the nearby hillside, was a large herd of pigs was feeding. So the demons begged Jesus, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." And he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and went into the pigs. And the herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it described what happened to the demon-possessed men and also to the pigs. And the people began to beg Jesus to leave their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demons begged to go with him, but Jesus would not allow him. "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." So the man went away and began to proclaim throughout the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. Now there are a few things here worthy of note. Now, I have been extremely clear that I do not believe that Jesus was divine, that he was a man, and that he could do miracles, right? I believe that this is a possibility. I believe in demon possession. I believe that they can be cast out. I don't know that it would be necessary to cast them into the pigs, because if you are indeed on this divine mission to cast out the unclean spirits, why would you listen to them when they tell you, "Don't let us stay, cast us out of the region"? Are you in possession, are you in command of the demon or not? Are you just going to let it hang around? You cast it out in here so it can go drown and take away the livelihood of these people. Now, it's easy to lose scope of that, right? It's easy to say he saved this man's life, and I'm not disputing that, right? Being freed from a legion of demons is a wonderful thing, but he had the power to cast them away, not into pigs. He didn't have to take 2,000 pigs. Now, this herd of pigs that lives, where are we? Gerasenes. I didn't look that up, but that sounds more Italian, right? So it's probably in the northern part of Galilee at the least. But why did they have a herd of 2,000 pigs? They're not allowed to eat pork. That's a thing, right? So they want to cast him out of the region because he just decimated somebody's livelihood. Now, you can argue the validity of it or whatever, but if he has the power to cast out the demons and they're begging him not to make them leave the region, Why did he listen to them? Why did he cast them into the pigs? That wasn't necessary. It would have been enough. This man had been living there in these tombs, uncontrollable, unable to be chained up, injuring himself for a long time. It would have been enough for him to cast them out. And there were witnesses. They didn't have to go into the pigs to show that the demons came out. They didn't have to go into the pigs for him to say, be gone, get gone. And they go, and everybody witnessed that. This man suddenly becomes sane. That's a miracle. That's enough. You didn't have to do this part. Doesn't make sense. When Jesus had again crossed by boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him beside the sea. A synagogue leader named Jairus arrived, and seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded with him urgently. My little daughter is near death. Oh, wait. And also, he told this dude, tell him how much the Lord has done for you. And he went and told them how much Jesus had done for them. Now, you can make the apologetics that Jesus believes he is divine. I don't think so, right? We're going to show that. It's hard because inside this book, we have additions, right? There are things that have been added to this book. These people were writing a religion. You may not like that, but that is what this is. They were establishing the religion of Christianity. This is the founding documents of the religion of Christianity. And so they are very much accommodating in the same way that Moses did when we got the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? That is accommodation. That is taking in these stories from outside or that already exist, that people already know, and making them internal, making them yours. Now, whether or not it is valid, I don't even care. The point is that they were very much established in a religion. And we're doing Mark because Mark is agreed by scholars to be the first actual thing that we have, that all of the core is here and everything that Matthew and Mark was added on, and John's its whole separate issue. But this book was written between 150 to 170, right, years after Christ. That's the oldest fragments we have. Now, there may have been a version that is older than that. We don't have it. But even if we're assuming that it was 20 years, 30 years, we're still 100 years out, right? That is like us today writing the story of Al Capone or Bugsy, right? Using only secondhand accounts because we're not there. We're getting this from the people who were there, right? But it's not the actual person writing it. It is a secondhand, at least, account. It's probably third or fourth even. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that this is very much an intentional document, very much intended to change a religion. That is a thing. You may not like the thing, but it is a thing. And so, my little daughter is near death. Please come and place your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had suffered from bleeding for 12 years. She had borne much agony under the care of many physicians, and had spent all she had, but to no avail. Instead, her condition had only grown worse. And when the woman heard about Jesus, she came up through the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she kept saying, if I only touch his garments, I will be healed. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. At once, Jesus was aware that power had gone out from him, and turning to the crowd, he asked, who touched my garments? And his disciples answered, you can see the crowd pressing in on you, and yet you asked, who touched me? But he kept looking around to see who had done this. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him, trembling in fear. And she told him the whole truth. Daughter, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free of your affliction. While he was still speaking, messengers from the house of Jairus arrived and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? But Jesus overheard their conversation and said to Jairus, do not be afraid, just believe. And he did not allow anyone to accompany him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they arrived at the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw the commotion and the people weeping and wailing loudly. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him. And after he had put them all outside, he took the child's father and mother and his own companions and went in to see the child. Taking her by the hand, Jesus said, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl got up and began walking around. She was 12 years old, and at once they were utterly astounded. And then Jesus gave strict orders that no one should know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Now, obviously, we have the blaring contradiction that he told them not to tell, but they did. That happens quite often, and humbleness is a thing. That is a true thing, and people like to talk regardless. That is a true thing, so we're not going to talk about that. Your faith has healed you is the thing that people just glide by. Now, she was convinced that if she touched his garment, that she would be healed. But if she would have had faith regardless, then she would have been healed. That is the implication here. Your faith has healed you. It was the fact that you thought that if you touched his garment, it would heal you. So much so that you risked your life to do so. And that is exactly what she did. And he felt the power leave him. Now, you probably don't know what that means. And a lot of people will fall off when I say this. I do. Because I do prayer and meditation, and I have felt the power that he's talking about. I have felt it enter and leave. I do believe in the electromagnetic manipulation of energetic forces of your own body through sheer force of will. Right? Some people consider that magic. I consider that a gift from God. I can consciously pull energy throughout my body. I cannot do anything visible. I have no idea if it's even testable, but I can feel the effects, and I'm healed. And so what we have is an understanding here. He is in a state of faith, right? That is a hard thing to maintain, and I understand that completely. But I believe that he was not necessarily divine, right? We are all the same level of divine. We are none of us gods, and each of us a piece of God. So we are all the same level. But that he had knowledge that the common man did not. That he had the dedication and the sheer force of will to do. Right? It is a hard path to be on the path he was on, but he held true to it. And so he had extra abilities. I am not merely saying that I can heal anyone. It doesn't happen. Right? I've healed me through the power of God, right? God intentionally gave me the power to heal me. And the parts where I can't quite keep up, that's my body readjusting. It's not like this. God didn't choose to do it that way. But he has healed me. And so I can speak with some authority about this. It is your faith that healed you, not Jesus, right? She was healed before Jesus knew. The power went out. That can be absolutely, let's make sure this is clear too, right? I hold conspiratorial beliefs. I believe in things that most people don't. It is entirely possible that this part where he felt it is completely made up. Now, I don't believe that. Where was it? It's up here. Once he was aware that the power had gone out from him, right? This could be a completely added thing for the benefit of the religion, right? You have to keep that in mind. I know in my mind that I believe that this is a thing. And so this is completely explainable to me. And then we get to this here with the little girl, right? This is not the first time that we have seen the dead be raised. This is not nearly the first time. It will not be the last time that we see it happen. So I don't know why people are so astounded by the resurrection part. Is it because nobody calls him out? Is it because he self does it? But that's not an impossibility. It's just highly discouraged. Right? Once you are done here, there's normally no reason to come back here. But you are only held by your energy inside the body by the will of the spirit. And so, like, your soul resides and makes the decisions inside the meat suit, but that is enabled by the spirit. So if the spirit decides that you can come back, you can. Right? If the body's not too far degraded, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, I'm not going to put time limits on it. I'm not going to give you a day count. But we will be getting to the day count soon, and that's not going to be happy for people. Jesus went on from there and came to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. Where did this man get these ideas? They asked. Where is the wisdom he has been given? What is the wisdom he has been given? How can he perform such miracles? Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us as well? And they took offense at him. And then Jesus said to them, only in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own household, is a prophet without honor. So he could not perform any miracles there, except to lay his hands on a few of the sick and heal them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. And he went around from village to village, teaching the people. That is an absolute thing, right? The people that know you don't believe that you can change. But it is important to note that the people who knew him didn't believe him. And then Jesus called the 12 to him and began to send them out 2 by 2, giving them authority over unclean spirits. He instructed them to take nothing but a staff for the journey, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, and to wear sandals, but not a second tunic. And he told them, when you enter a house, stay there until you leave that area. And if anyone will not welcome you or listen to you, shake off the dust of your feet when you leave that place, as a testimony against them. So they set out and preached that the people should repent. They also drove out many demons and healed many of the sick, anointing them with oil. Not impossible. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you can be taught to heal, right? I haven't, but people, like, Reiki's a thing. You may not believe in Reiki, but there have been some astounding things happen with Reiki. So there are things that are not explained by the doctrines. I have zero problems believing in people going out and doing ministry with taking nothing with them and the provision happening. Zero problems with that. I have been provided for. The shake off your dust, it's whatever. Like, if they don't believe you, all right, knock it loose and come on. If somebody provides for you, stay there until you leave that area is a little bit, like, how long until you leave the area, right? But I get that too. They drove out many demons and healed the sick, anointing them with oil, right? He sent out these 12 people to various places, and they're all doing the same thing. Now, you can believe that that's because he vested authority in them, but I don't have to. I believe that they could do it, that they just had to have the faith that they could do it, and that the vestment of authority gave them the faith to do it. Now, King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known, and people were saying, John the Baptist has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him. And others were saying, he is Elijah. And still others, he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has risen from the dead? For Herod himself had ordered that John be arrested and bound and imprisoned, on account of his brother Philip's wife Herodias, whom Herod had married. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. How? We got to interrupt this one, because as a matter of fact, in the Jewish tradition, right, in the Torah, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. If your brother leaves a widow, you're supposed to marry her. That's in the book. How is that what John's calling him out on? Now, I don't doubt that happened, because there was probably something else going on, right? We're not going to dig into the history. I don't care enough. He probably killed his brother and took his wife, because that happened all the time back then. That shit was crazy. But what we need to pay attention to here is that John's calling him out for something that is in his law to do. Right? So Herodias held a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she had been unable, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man. When he heard John's words, he was greatly perplexed, yet he listened to him gladly. On Herod's birthday, her opportunity arose. Herod held a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias came and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." And he swore to her, "Whatever you ask of me, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." And then she went out and asked her mother, "What should I request?" And her mother answered, "The head of John the Baptist." And at once the girl hurried back to the king with her request, "I want you to give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter immediately." And the king was consumed with sorrow, but because of his oath and his guests, he did not want to refuse her. So without delay, the king commanded that John's head be brought in. He sent an executioner who went in, beheaded him in the prison. The man brought John's head on a platter and presented it to the girl, who gave it to her mother. And when John's disciples heard about this, they came and took his body and placed it in a tomb. Now, I don't have anything to add to that. It seems to be history. It's probably verifiable. So, meanwhile, the apostles gathered around Jesus and brought him news of all they had done and taught. And he said to them,
"Come with me privately to a solitary place, and let us rest for a while."
For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they went away in a boat by themselves to a solitary place. But many people saw them leaving and recognized them. They ran together on foot from all the towns and arrived before them. And when Jesus stepped ashore and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. By now the hour was already late, so the disciples came to Jesus and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is already late. Dismiss the crowd so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat." But Jesus told them,
"You give them something to eat."
and they asked him, "Should we go out and spend 200 denarii to give them all bread to eat?"
"Go and see how many loaves you have,"
he told them. And after checking, they said 5, and 2 fish. And then Jesus directed them to have people sit in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, Jesus spoke a blessing and broke the loaves. And then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. And there were 5,000 men who had eaten the loaves. Again, I have zero problem with miracles of provision, like zero. I believe that any of it is possible, so it doesn't necessarily have to be divine in order for it to happen. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After bidding them farewell, he went up on the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and Jesus was alone on land. He could see that the disciples were straining to row because the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the sea. He intended to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they cried out, thinking he was a ghost, for they all saw him and were terrified. But Jesus spoke up at once.
"Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid."
And then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and the disciples were utterly astounded, for they had not understood about the loaves, but their hearts had been hardened. When they crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and moored the boat. As soon as they got out of the boat, the people recognized Jesus and ran through that whole region, carrying the sick on mats wherever they had heard he was, and wherever he went, villages and towns and countrysides. They laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him just to let them touch the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched him were healed. Again, I don't have problems with miracles. I believe that you might have the faith it takes to walk on water. Apparently I don't. I've tried. It doesn't work for me. I'm not claiming to be some prophet or some miracle worker. I'm just believing that it's possible. I'm believing that you can do it because you're told that you can do it, right? I'm believing what it says in large as opposed to in particular instances. I have zero problems with any of the miracles. Then the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, and they saw some of his disciples eating with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. Now, in holding with the tradition of the elders, the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat until they wash their hands ceremonially. And on returning from the market, they do not eat unless they wash, and there are many other traditions for them to observe, including the washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, and couches for dining. So the Pharisees and scribes questioned Jesus, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders? Instead, they eat with defiled hands." And Jesus answered them,
Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites,
"As it is written,
but these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. They teach as doctrine the precepts of men. You have disregarded the commandment of God to keep the tradition of men."
He went on to say, "You nearly set aside the command of God to maintain your own tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and anyone who curses his father or mother must be put to death. But you say that if a man says to his father or mother, 'Whatever you have received from me is korban,' that is, a gift devoted to God, he is no longer permitted to do anything for his father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by the tradition you have handed down, and you do so in many such matters." This is exactly what I am doing. Right? I am going through and pointing out all of the places where they have added on things. Right? God's thing is simple: love God as you like. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? That is the law writ large. There are addendums that you can add on to them. Anything past that point is an addendum added on to them. Now, my addendums are: go forth, be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth and be stewards thereof, shed no blood of man. Right? That is it. But there's all kinds of things that are added on. Right? Gathering firewood on the Sabbath gets you hit in the head with a rock. That is my go-to example because it is utterly ridiculous. That is, if you are intentionally not gathering wood in order that you're not going to honor God by taking the day off, that's one thing. But if you just happen to need the wood and you go pick it up, that's another thing, right? If you are intentional in your disrespect, it is different from accidental. There is no distinction for that in the law. There is no distinction for emergency situations or whatever. There are a lot of things wrong, like fundamentally flawed in the law. That's why we did the Old Testament so meticulously. I think that anything past honoring God is going too far, right? If you're telling someone you can't drink, that's a sin, then you are doing the wrong thing. God will tell them if that drink's a sin. That's not up to you. Now, interfering in murder, absolutely. Stop someone from killing someone, right? But if it's a small sin in your eyes, it may not be in God's. And so if they're smoking, it's not up for you to talk about it. If they're drinking, it's not up for you to talk about it. That is between them and God. Quit throwing people away from God by claiming you're talking for God. That is the same thing he is doing here. You have disregarded the commandment of God to keep the tradition of men. Now, we have differences in commandments, but that's okay. And once again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said,
"All of you, listen to me
and understand, nothing that enters a man from the outside can defile him. But the things that come out of a man, these are what defile him." And after Jesus had left the crowd and gone into the house, his disciples inquired about the parable.
"Are you still so dull? Do you not understand? Nothing that enters a man from the outside can defile him."
Because it does not enter his heart, but it goes into the stomach and then is eliminated. Thus all foods are clean. And he continued, what comes out of a man, that is what defiles him. For from within the hearts of men come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, debauchery, envy, slander, arrogance, and foolishness. All these evils come from within, and these are what defile a man. And yet we still argue about things. We still argue about whether you can eat pork or shrimp, or if you can eat lobster, or if you can do things, or if you can wear things. None of these things in and of themselves will ever defile you. It is only your intentions that can prove to be your defilement. You can drink casually and there are zero problems. Or you can turn drink into an idol in your life and there are enormous problems. It's not the drink, it's you. It's your intention. It is how you handle the situation. Jesus left that place and went to the region of Tyre. Not wanting anyone to know he was there, he entered a house but was unable to escape their notice. Instead, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit soon heard about Jesus, and she came and fell at his feet. Now, she was a Greek woman of Syrophoenician origin, and she kept asking Jesus to drive out the demon out of her daughter.
Let the children have their fill, he said, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs.
Yes, Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And then Jesus told her,
because of this answer you may go. The demon has left your daughter.
And she went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. And here we have something, right? We have Jesus being racist. You don't like that? Too bad. He had zero intention of saving the Gentiles prior to this and the well, right? He had zero intention of taking this to the Gentiles. And yet that is exactly where the churches were founded. It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Now this is presupposing the chosen one narrative, right? The chosen people, the chosen deliverer, the chosen savior. It presupposes that, but I don't. I don't believe that there was. I believe that this is proof that Jesus was a man and not a God. Because if he was God, he would know that God created all people, and he would know that it was his mission to save all people. If it was his mission divinely given to him that he knew about to save all of mankind. That is a contradiction, and you can't apologize for it. And I don't care. I believe that Jesus was a man who saw something that he could impact, and he did it to his great detriment. But this let the children have their fill, he is talking about the Israelites and only the Israelites, and he is calling everyone else on the entire planet a dog right here. Take from that what you will.
Then Jesus left the region of Tyre
And went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, and into the region of the Decapolis. Some people brought to him a man who was deaf and hardly able to speak, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. So Jesus took him aside privately, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue, and looking up to heaven, he sighed deeply, and said to him, Ephaphantha, which means, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he began to speak plainly. And Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone. But the more he ordered them, the more widely they proclaimed it. The people were utterly astonished and said, He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf hear and the mute speak. Where are we at? That is the wrong program. 34 minutes. Okay, we got time. All right. I didn't know if we was going to have time to get into this, but again, I don't have problems with miracles. This one is particular because it's one of the few where he actually has to do something physical in order to make it happen, right? Most of the time it is, your faith has healed you, or be gone. But in this particular one, he sticks his fingers in the dude's ears, right? And then he spits on his hand. and touches the dude's tongue. Well, it doesn't say he spit on his hand, but he spat and touched the man's tongue. And then he spoke. So this is one of the few times where he actually had to lay hands on something. And that's just a good thing to know because it's unusual, right? Most of the time he just doesn't have to do that. In those days, the crowd once again became very large, and they had nothing to eat. And Jesus called the disciples to him and said,
I have compassion for this crowd, because they have already been with me for 3 days,
and have nothing to eat.
if I send them home hungry.
They will faint along the way, for some of them have come a great distance. And his disciples replied, Where in this desolate place could anyone find enough bread to feed all these people?
How many loaves do you have?
Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and he instructed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And then he took the 7 loaves, gave thanks, and broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they distributed them to the crowd. They also had a few small fish, and Jesus blessed them and ordered that these be set before them as well. And the people ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And about 4,000 men were present. And as soon as Jesus had dismissed the crowd, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanatha. I don't have a problem with provision. Again, I believe that provision through faith is absolutely a thing. Again. And so I have no problem with that, other than that this is really close to the last one. And it is remarkable that the apostles are astounded, once again, by this process. Now, the first time, that is absolutely believable, right? You just fed 5,000 people with this small amount of food. That's an amazing thing. But how are you amazed by it twice? I get that the crowds would be, but how are you? After seeing it once, like, well, you can't do that. How are we going to feed these people? How do you do that? Like, almost to the same words, right? It's just funny. Then the Pharisees came and began to argue with Jesus, testing him by demanding from him a sign from heaven. Jesus sighed deeply in his spirit and said,
Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation.
And he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. There are signs that absolutely will accompany the fulfillment of the Masonic age. Right? Absolutely. With zero doubt, Isaiah prophesied things that will be clearly visible that everyone will see at the fulfillment of the Messianic age. It does not say that there will not be any sign. We have in another place that they will be given a sign, but it's a different sign, and it's a sign that they proclaim upon themselves. Right? It's not in Isaiah. I haven't found in Isaiah where there has to be a literal physical incarnation, right? On this side of the judgment at all. There is no prophecy where the Messiah is going to be killed, entombed, and raised 3 days later. Not a one. Not a single prophecy. And he is telling you here that there will not be any signs. We are coming up on the celebration of Ishtar, complete with bunnies and eggs. And it is important to note that there are 0 prophecies about the death, entombment, and resurrection of the Messiah. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, except for 1 loaf that they had with them in the boat. Watch out, he cautioned them. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. So they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. Aware of their conversation, Jesus asked them,
Why are you debating about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Do you have such hard hearts? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember?
When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect? 12, they answered. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect? 7, they said. And then he asked them, do you still not understand? That's what I have a problem with, right? How do you not understand this? Provision will be made. And if you're living with someone and he is the divine, right? And he is literally making bread appear from nothing, because that's literally what's happening. Taking these bread and splitting it among this many people is making something from really nothing. It is manifesting. I believe it is possible. And it is not literally nothing, because you have source and you can multiply from source. So I get all of that. I get the mechanics of it where most people don't. But how do you witness it? How is it like, if this is the chosen people, how did not God build them to recognize signs when they saw them? Like, all the way back through their history, they're being led through the desert by a pillar of fire and smoke, and they forget that, like quickly. They forget being led across the Red Sea. They forget being led through the desert. They forget being provided for. They forget a lot of things that is miraculous. Like the ground opens up and swallows some people. Like, forget it. They're just, oh yeah. It's a pattern, right? Do you still not understand? When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And he spit on the man's eyes and placed his hands on him. Can you see anything? He asked. And the man looked up and said, I can see the people, but they look like trees walking around. And once again Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes. And when he opened them, his sight was restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him home and said, do not go back into the village. And then Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he questioned his disciples,
who do people say I am?
And they replied, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets.
What about you? Who do you say I am?
And Peter answered, you are the Christ. And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about them. And then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this message quite frankly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But Jesus, turning and looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. And this is where it is important to note that there is no prophecy. You notice right here, you have Matthew and you have Luke, which are based off of Mark, and they talk about it, but there's no Isaiah in here. There's no Daniel in here. There's no Hosea. There's no Jeremiah. That is because there is 0 prophecies that say this. There are none. There is not a single prophecy fulfilled by this. There are none. You can make the argument for Jonah that is not. Jonah was not prophesying about the Messiah, for one. It was his own personal journey, and Jesus is the only source for that. And so we've got a very significant problem. Very significant problem. And this is one of those doctrinal issues, right? This is not a prophecy. There was no prophecy fulfilled by Jesus dying and being resurrected. None. Not a single one. I haven't been able to find it. I spent the whole weekend. That's why we didn't have a Bible study at all on Friday, and why I decided to go this route with it starting yesterday, is because I was looking all weekend trying to find a source. If you find one, you're a better researcher than I am. I haven't been able to. There is no Old Testament reference that says that this has to happen. That is a significant problem. It is no coincidence that my God brought me to this message this week. I did not coordinate the timings on this. I did not make this happen in this manner. I did not take the time. If I would have started when I started the Bible study, if he would not have stopped me for a period of time, I would have been well past this before Easter week, Ishtar week. It is very important. This is probably the most important part of the entirety of this Bible study right here. And then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples, and he told them, "If anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel will save it. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." And so we have the narcissist wrap up. If you dare to doubt the things that I tell you, even though right above this is a direct contradiction to Scripture, if you dare to disbelieve, then you're in trouble. God has told us so many times through this book that there was never a sacrifice required. There is, however, a lifestyle change required. Taking up your cross is not necessarily going to be crucified. It is doing the things that you are called by God to do. I do fully believe that these men were creating a religion. And I'm not arguing against the religion, right? Christianity has done wonderful things and some pretty terrible ones. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional views and that I have a tendency to step on toes as I deliver the information that I am told to deliver. I am not doing it intentionally. It is just how I'm built. I don't apologize for it because I'm not saying anything that isn't plainly written, right? I do absolutely make wild assumptions. I try to be clear about that when I do. I do believe in things that most people don't, and I try to be clear about that when I talk about it. But the things that I am discussing here are easily researchable. You can absolutely go and try, and I will absolutely receive the correction if you can find the prediction that Jesus would be dead and raised from the dead. That is an important part of the Christian story, right? Like, that is an important thing. It is not something that was foretold, despite the fact that we were told that it was a fulfillment of a prophecy. It was not. There is no prophecy. And so that is a very big problem. It doesn't have to be for you. You can be perfectly content. You can find God in Christianity. I just don't feel like that is the only way. I believe that Jesus followed the way, and that is a whole different thing, right? That when he says my way, right, I think that he is talking about the way that is completely different. That God created all of us, and that his path is the way of creation, the way of oneness, the way of God, however you want to look at it. I understand that it makes me blasphemous to say these things. I am perfectly fine with that. Have you seen what I've been doing here? Have you seen the entities that we're dealing with? Do you want to be associated with that? I don't. I am perfectly fine going to God by himself with no interference whatsoever. I'm not trying to take away from Jesus' mission. I do believe that he came here with a purpose. I believe that that purpose was to put an end to the blood sacrifice. And then he tried, and then we built a whole religion around the blood sacrifice and perpetuating, at least in spirit, that, which is pretty horrible. I don't believe that any sacrifice was ever necessary. I believe that I have sufficiently shown that in the Old Testament, despite the fact that they were told in the Old Testament to make sacrifices. I don't believe that it was necessary. I believe that men added that on in the same way that we see it being done here. When he calls out the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they are doing that. The exact same thing that Moses did. Doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong. It was creating a new level of understanding. The people around were pretty terrible. What was happening when the Israelis left Egypt, that was pretty wild times. Go back and read your history books. See what was happening. Read what was happening. What the things they outlawed were things that were common, right? All of the horrible things that they're like, don't do this specific thing, it's because people were doing it with regularity. And so they were setting themselves apart. That is great. I just believe that they went a little too far. Hitting somebody in the head with a rock because they went out to pick up sticks, that's a little bit wild to me. And I don't believe that God will ever tell you to hit somebody in the head with a rock. As a matter of fact, I seem to recall the first time that happened, he got pretty upset about it. And so it's important to note that religion does not mean God. You can find God in religion. If you are devout in your faith and you truly believe the things that you claim, then you probably will find God in your religion. But if you are just paying lip service, you won't. It doesn't matter what your religion is. You can walk up that aisle 10 million times. Say that prayer 10 million times, and if you don't change your life, nothing is different in your life. And that prayer did you no good. What is desired by God is you. It is a willing sacrifice of your sin to be forgiven for sin. It is not a goat, it is not a cow, and it is not a person. There was never any intervention necessary. All you ever had to do was ask for forgiveness. If you say something like this, Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you as a sinner and I ask for your forgiveness. I accept the grace that you freely extend and I ask you to change my life. It's done. If you said it and you meant it, then it's done. He will write his law on your heart. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Go forth. Go forth, be fruitful and multiply. Subdue the earth and be stewards thereof, and shed no blood of man. That is the whole of the law, and it is now written on your heart. Now, if there are individual things that are idols in your life, he will tell you about it. He will let you know that you need to quit drinking, if you need to quit drinking. He will let you know that you need to quit smoking, if you need to quit smoking. He will let you know personally what you are doing wrong, and it is up to you to listen to what he tells you. That's the deal. You say, I will do it. He says, okay, do this, and then you have to do it. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.